there, and welcome to X-Trail, our political program where we look at everything that's happening on and off the campaign trail. The meetings have begun in person and virtually. One party is even putting screens up on various areas so that the prospective voters can get the message. But 3.5 years later, and in the middle of an ongoing pandemic, what will it take to get the electorate to go to the polls? I'll be talking to my guest, His Excellency Ambassador to CARICOM, Comissiong, Senior Lecturer in Political Science at the UWI, Dr. Tennyson Joseph. We were expecting the Deputy Leader of the Alliance Party for Progress, Lynette Eastman, to join us, but unfortunately she's not able to make it. But a representative of the party, Raquel, will join us in just a little while. So we'll take a break. When we come back, we find out what does it take to get out the vote. Stay with us. And we're back. But let's find out what's the overall thoughts on the campaign so far. I'm going to start with you, Dr. Tennyson Joseph. Your thoughts on the race so far, especially the mood of the electorate.
Hi, thank you for having me. In context of the wider discussion about getting out the vote and the general mood of the election, I think this one would be a peculiar one when you motivation, and one is almost expecting a low turnout, and I think all the parties would have to work hard to bring out the vote. And let me just say why I think it might be a low turnout, although it may not really hold true, but the broad assumptions as to why we may see a low turnout. I think first of all, it's an early election, and there may be a context of electoral fatigue, especially since there was an election almost just years ago. If you think of the people of St. George, they'd be voting
people of
St.
George North. Yeah.
They'd be voting like 3 times in the last, let's say, 3.5 years. And of course, again, if it's an election which is widely expected to be one that sees the re-election of the incumbent ruling BLP. So in a context of this nature, there may be people might just assume it's already a fait accompli. The opposition appears not to be fully ready, and therefore the motivation to come out and defend the party is lower. So in a sense, there was nothing to come and fight hard to vote for, either in defense of something or against something. I think to a large extent, the DLP voters might perhaps have a little bit more motivation, in the sense that they've been given an opportunity to come out of a situation where they have no seats in the parliament. 3.5 years ago, they had absolutely no representation, and some of their seats, that are historically DLP seats, would feel that they've been given an early chance to come and put some semblance of normalcy in the Parliament of Barbados. But plus the COVID factor. So you have the COVID factor as perhaps a third factor, which may suggest that we may have some unusually low numbers this time. But although, as I'm proposing, these are not hard facts, but these are just broad theoretical assumptions as to why we may see a low poll. And I think in this context, the parties would have to work extra hard and do some novel things, which we can probably talk about a little later, about how they can bring out the voters this time around.
There've also been elections in other parts of the region within this pandemic. Do we know whether or not the turnouts were, the turnout was lower, or maybe we saw something a little higher, or is that information still not collated as yet?
Well, I can't speak objectively, but I know, for example, the Jamaica election that we elected Andrew Holness to office was an unusually low poll. One is not sure whether it was only due to COVID or perhaps again due to the same factors, like in terms of opposition demotivation and so forth. But then when one thinks of the kinds of the normal protocols involved in COVID, and some people being extra careful and safe, one would expect, in other words, these are not normal conditions for an election, and therefore one might expect those abnormal conditions to have some impact on voter turnout.
Ambassador Comissiong, your thoughts on the race so far, especially the mood of the electorate?
Thanks, Jewel. It's difficult for me to assess exactly what the mood is, but the fundamental factor in this election is the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've had about 18 months now to scrutinize how countries have done in elections in a COVID era. And generally speaking, um, there have been lower turnouts. In fact, there have been 9 elections across CARICOM since COVID was declared a pandemic, starting with Suriname, which incidentally I observed. I was a member of the CARICOM electoral observer mission to Suriname, but we have had Suriname, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, St. Vincent, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, Belize, the Bahamas, Jamaica. So Barbados would make number 10. And I think uniformly, right across the board, the numbers have been down. However, if you look at the international scene, there have been a number of elections held during the COVID period where numbers have been up. Although it is true to say that the majority of international elections have seen a decline in numbers. But I did do some research this morning, and numbers were up in Burundi, Germany, Israel, Mongolia, Montenegro, Poland, Singapore, Slovakia, South Korea, Spain, Sri Lanka, and Togo. And but when you look at the factors, there's several factors, and some of which may very well be relevant to Barbados. One factor that was there in Poland and Montenegro is that the issues in the election were so fundamental, and that in spite of COVID,
It galvanized the
it
voters.
brought out the people. That's something that perhaps we can examine a little later on. But in across the board, and we can look at these categories. Some people put special voting arrangements in place. Some people downplayed COVID. Some people had special electioneering techniques, and so forth. But so I would say that chances are in Barbados, it is likely to be a lower than usual turnout because of COVID. But I would also say, if the Barbadian people are thinking correctly, Barbados, there are 3 very fundamental issues that the country is facing. In a sense, 3 crises: the financial and economic crisis that is still there, COVID-19 crisis, and the climate crisis. So Barbadians do have a very compelling reason to take this election very seriously in terms of determining who is going to take Barbados forward to grapple with these 3 interlocking crises.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador Comissiong. Well, Raquel Gilkes, the representative for the Alliance Party for Progress, has just joined us. Hi, Raquel. Lovely to see you.
Hi, nice to see you.
You missed my first question, so I'm going to bring you in on that. Your overall thoughts on the race so far and the mood of the electorate.
Well, that's my overall thoughts on the race. I don't know. I'm focused on trying to get my party ready and trying to get my candidates on the road and get everything done. So I'm a little focused on that, but as is the reaction to the electorate, I'm having a reaction that I did not expect because of the history of voting in Barbados. And I guess anybody know, we can look at the history. We usually we've never had a one-party government, so we always, for the second term, you kind of try to consolidate. If you're in the opposition, you try to get your candidates train, you try to get your teams in place, you get all the constituency, the little constituency branches active and stuff like that. But we're having a very weird mood where people are saying um, they don't like they, they don't like the 30 love. And even though we did end up with an opposition of one, people are still very concerned about the fact that there was not a strong opposition, and by strong they mean in terms of numbers, because of course the opposition represented as in Caswell and leader of the
And
opposition
members of the
was
Senate as
added.
well.
The members of the Senate represented, so they felt, well, okay, they saw the opposition, but they're like, okay, we need a stronger opposition, we need more votes in the House and that kind of thing. And they're actually saying, well, we don't need to have a one party. So rather than the canvas being like, oh, I'm happy with what the government is doing, I don't know what I can do, I can't help you, they're very concerned that, like, is the opposition ready to be the government, because the government basically had too many seats last time and there was not enough done to justify having so many seats and no opposition. And so the people of Barbados believe that they might actually be able to change the government.
That would be interesting.
So,
I'm going to come back
and the thing
to.
is,
Go ahead, finish.
there's a sense that, I don't know, they're tired of two parties and they're happy to see that there's another party in the race. And they're actually, saying, well, I want to vote for the third party because I'm not happy with either of the two parties. We put out the Democratic Labour Party, and we don't want them back, but we are not happy with the government that we put in. So we want to see what the other party can bring to the table.
I want to go back to Dr. Joseph, because Raquel said something very interesting, that people are uneasy with the one party. But our Westminster system allows for that, no?
Well, I wouldn't go as far as saying that they're ready to change the government the way that Raquel has put it. I would say, though, and that's the point I was trying to make earlier, and I just want Joel, if you just permit me, to make a slightly broader comment than the first one I made. One of my observations about the way the Prime Minister has approached politics, if I like to say sometimes that she is an example of political overreach sometimes. That sometimes she does some very broad, big things, and you're not sure whether it was called for. So, for example, let us say, the by-election in St. George, I was always writing and saying, but was it necessary? I mean, we were trying to replace Glenn Clark, who was due to retirement. Couldn't have not waited for this election now or whenever it was called. So you had a by-election in St. George for the act of bringing in MP Tony Moore to replace Glenn Clark. Then you had the cabinet reshuffle, and I was always saying, but if I asked some serious commentators, can you give me the rationale behind the cabinet reshuffle? And of course, I heard.
But I think at the time that she did the cabinet reshuffle, there'd been a lot of unease, as Raquel had said, about how big the cabinet was. Here we were in a situation where you were telling everybody to tighten their belt, but yet you've got this big cabinet.
Yeah, but the size did not change. The size of the cabinet did not change. So the size of the cabinet did not change dramatically. So that's the same point I'm making. And then the early election is one, and I want to tie it into what Raquel has just said. I don't agree with Raquel's overly optimistic view about change of government. What I have been arguing, and what I was trying to say in my introduction, was that what it has done. In other words, I had 30 seats, and I had 5 years with 30 seats. I could govern relatively. In fact, I could have governed relatively comfortably with those 30 seats. And then when the election was due, it was called in 4 years or a little earlier or a little later. But the point is, the equation will not change too much. So what the possible outcome now is that the DLP can gain a few seats. So what in my view she has done, she has shortened the timeline of the crisis of the DLP. In other words, the return to normalcy of the normal opposition politics that Raquel is saying people are calling for, shorten the timeline for that. Now, the other thing too is, and a critical view to me, is what happens internally. Because this election is not about anybody else winning the election other than than the BLP. We know that for a fact. So the election really is about how many seats can the DLP gain? Can they recover? And one of the things with what I call the overreaching of the politics, what it has done, it tends to make people who are the internal people, a little uneasy. So if you think of a first time parliamentarian like Marshall Caddell, your MP in St. Lucie, your MP in St. John, and several others. We just won an election 3 years ago, and now the party has put them in a position where some of them are fighting for their political lives so I'm saying that's the only negative outcome I see in the whole thing for the BLP. But if there are negative outcomes, when you do a cost benefit, what was the issue that made it so necessary, that made the election, as it was called, how it was called, necessary? And of course, when I do that analysis, I can't think of many things except to conclude that perhaps the prime minister is so confident in what she has, that the hand that she's been dealt, that she can afford to be expansive and experimental. But sometimes you cannot be too experimental in politics, because sometimes you get a backlash that perhaps some people might say, but you're playing too much, or you're too
You're too
very
confident. You're too confident.
right. And also what it means, as I was saying to you, in relation to internally. So let's take, for example, some of the internal fallout. So you have things like the some of the MPs who are a little concerned that they were not going to be re-selected. Let's take the Lucille Moore situation, who was a close personal confidant and friend of the prime minister, and supported the reshuffle, created a context of internal fissure. So in terms of the negatives, I know I might be sounding not the same, but if she's going to win anyway, doesn't matter. But those little negatives add up.
They add
So
up. They add up.
in terms of the mood, I think these are the kind of questions that, if you want to point to some minuses that might be in the air. But in terms of losing the election, I don't think any of us in this serious commentator actually believes that. But I think it has implications for the long term of the short to medium
Okay.
term return of normal politics in Barbados.
Thank
And
you,
I think
Dr.
what she has
Joseph.
done
We are
is
going to
that she
take a
has shortened
break.
the cycle.
We're going to take a break. When we come back, more on X Trail. Don't go away. And we're back. If you're just joining us, welcome to X Trail. My guest is Excellency Ambassador to CARICOM, David Comissiong, the representative for the Alliance Party for Progress, Raquel Gilkes, and Senior Lecturer in Political Science at the UWI, Dr. Tennyson Joseph. Raquel, I'm going to start back with you. I know you from your work with United Progressive Party, and now that party has joined with Bishop Joseph Atherley's Party for Progress, Democracy and Development. Do you think that the two parties coming together have a better chance together at the polls than they would have as two separate parties?
Yes, we think that they have a better chance together at the polls than they did. And also, part of our governing philosophy in the UPP is always to work with others to show that we can cooperate and to incorporate any strengths that someone may bring that we may not have, because we did not have 30 candidates in the UPP. The last time we ran, we also ran in a coalition, and we had 22 candidates last election. So as a smaller party, we will always have difficulty attracting politicians, candidates, and also supporters. And we believe when you have smaller parties, we don't have 100,000 supporters. So instead of splitting that vote among persons who will not be agreeing with the the Labour, because the truth is the BND is Labour. They're both Labour parties, so basically their philosophies are very close to
Similar,
each other.
yes.
So when you have our ideas, we are progressive. And so we have different ideas about the environment, about how to use technology, about how to leverage technology for our development, things that are not even dreamed of in the philosophy of the two Labour parties. Many of the smaller parties are also interested in these areas, so there is synergy, and we wouldn't want to split that among more parties than we have to, when we can try to concentrate that and increase our chances at landing some, an MP. So that is
How
why
how do you
mhm.
think smaller parties or alliances can make themselves more visible during the term? Because it seems as though you only hear about these parties when elections are called. But throughout the rest of the term, when there's so many issues, you're not hearing the voices of these smaller parties. Or are they, or are the where their voices are being heard, not everybody is hearing them? Because I know a lot of smaller parties work with social media, but not everybody's on social media.
It is true. Well, smaller parties and how widely you spread yourself, how popular you will be, will always depend on resources. And we are just in a place where we are building now. We are getting our resources together, and that is going to be something that we have to do. For example, the United Progressive Party, while we were between elections in the term, we did have a very vigorous social media presence. We had our members out there. They were working in the community. They were meeting people. They took part in many of the community outreach programs and helping with the relief effort for the COVID relief effort. Some of our candidates like delivered soup from the soup kitchens, and they did a lot of work in the community trying to help people who had lost their jobs and that sort of thing. We have persons who would help people write resumes, and we have our candidates are out there working. But the truth of the matter is about resources. Larger parties can buy ads in the newspaper. They can put up, they can have meetings and whole outside meetings, whole national meetings in between campaigns. They can put themselves forward and they can pay for those things. They have the resources to pay to be in the nation, to pay to take up an ad and get coverage and that kind of thing. We continue to work, but we would not get the same level
The
of
same
coverage.
coverage.
We have been sending statements to the press. We update them on our activities. We have been updating our sites. We have been writing letters to the press, and we've been doing just generally the same thing that the larger parties would do, but they would get the coverage and we would not. So unless we can pay for that coverage, we just will not get it.
Campaign financing is
And
a
so,
conversation for another day. But as we're here,
yes, I know we do.
I wanna go back to Dr. Joseph. Let's look at the campaign styles of getting out the vote. The BLPs is always more glitzy and technologically driven, while the DLP always seems more focused on their ground game. And as Raquel just says, the smaller parties, their focus is more on social media because that, to a large extent, is the cheaper alternative. Is style part of the party's ethos, or is it a reflection of its coffers?
Well, I don't think style and ethos don't go together. Ethos is philosophy, and style has to do with tactics and necessity. I think though what the COVID-19 situation has done is has leveled the playing field for all, because I think all parties now will be relying a lot more on social media and kind of virtual meetings and so forth. The playing field has been leveled. The cost is the same to all. It's free and cheap for all. I also think too, though, that in terms of what you see, what you call the ground game. I mean, I don't want to personalize it too much, but I have seen a number of DLPs on the ground doing house to house. When I live, they've come to me, and I've not seen any DLP people doing house to house. I made it speaking for my small community by itself, and so we should not extrapolate from that. But but I'm raising that because I think the house-to-house campaign, the walking, the face-to-face meetings, not the broad meetings, but the walking from house to house has to be done. These things again don't have much cost. These are really that has to do with loyal people who do that for you. The trained personnel who know how to work a list and to know how to work a community can do that for you. And I also feel too, what you might see happening more would be a question of the small communities. They can do the small community meetings. Even the normal everyday elections would have had small meetings, and the crowds are not big. So I'm not referring to a national meeting or even a broad community meeting, but a village meeting, a rum shop meeting. Those things don't really affect they don't have any bearing football numbers, because you can be in a small community in a large playing field and people spread out. So I think these are the new things that the parties would have to do. But I also
Well, Dr.
what
Joseph, let
Joel
me
is
stop you
saying.
there because quickly before we go to break, I want to throw to Ambassador Comissiong and get his thoughts
Sure,
on
sure.
getting out the vote and the different styles of the parties. Ambassador Comissiong?
I don't have much to say about that. I prefer to talk about politics is really it's about philosophy, it's about commitment to the people. Is not some kind of lucky dip when an election comes along and some people rustle up a party. So, for example, this APP, I mean, you come together, in a couple of days, and parties are not formed like that. You know, the reality is that Barbados faced one of its greatest crises over the past 3.5, 4 years. You know, the economic and financial crisis that we were down in a deep hole. When the government got some control over that, we were hit by the COVID-19 pandemic that collapsed the entire tourism industry, that presented us with a life and death public health challenge. Hurricanes, the Superior volcano, and we can go on and on. So this was this period when persons interested in public life, political organizations, needed to show their worth. This was a period when, if you had something to offer, you needed to offer it then. What are the new ideas? Not just criticizing the government. What are the new ideas to respond to these great challenges? Some of the greatest challenges Barbados has ever faced. And so I think that if we are really going to analyze this election seriously, we have to look at the position that the Prime Minister has taken. The Prime Minister and the Barbados Labour Party had 18 months of a right to govern. They've taken that 18 months of a right to govern and said, look, we are not going to utilize it. In fact, we are going to go back to the people, and we are going to go back to the people because we are not just looking at our narrow political party interests. We are looking at a larger national interest, that there's a reality that Barbados as a country has to face. We have to deal with the financial and economic situation that still has not been fully resolved. We have to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, and we have to deal with the climate crisis that has already started to visit us. And the
Okay,
Prime
thank you,
Minister has said,
Ambassador
look,
Comissiong. We've really got to go to commercial break, but when we come back, we continue our conversation and we look at the People Say Our segment from our social media. Stay with us. And welcome back to the X Trail. I'm going to let Ambassador Comissiong finish his thought, and then we're going to go to the People Say Our segment, where we look at the comments and questions that come from our social media pages. Ambassador?
Yes, Jewel. The point I'm really trying to make is I don't think you can examine the move that the Prime Minister has made simply in terms of the normal, typical political partisan calculus. I think she has transcended that. I think she believes that her administration was given a very serious mission to accomplish on behalf of the nation and people of Barbados, and that over the past 3.5 years, she has established a relationship, a partnership with the Barbadian people, so she does not fear the people. She's putting her faith in the hands of the people and is saying, look, there's this beyond just the political partisanship. There's this bigger national mission that we have to accomplish together, and we're asking you to give us that renewed mandate where the country can settle down and we can really work on these three crises that we still have dealing with as a people.
Okay,
I
thank
think
you.
that's it.
Yes, thank you very much, Ambassador. Now, the people say it's our segment where we take comments and questions from our social media. So we're going to go with our first one. We have nearly 1,500 people in isolation as of yesterday and primary contacts in quarantine. Who knows how this will affect these elections with the projected low voter turnout, as they will not be allowed to vote. Raquel, I'm going to come to you on this one. Your thoughts?
I was listening to your other two speakers before when they were talking about the, the leveling of the playing field and all that kind of thing that social media would do. You don't level the playing field when you can buy $100,000 in ads on social media, and then you have a small party that can only afford 2 ads. So that's the same thing with this question, where you have people in quarantine and and the ones in isolation, they will not be allowed to vote. And you're telling me that you have an overwhelming mandate. You got 30 seats the last time. You're dealing with 3 crises, and you have absolutely no need to call an election. You are not taking the people of Barbados into your confidence. You are not telling them what it is you intend to do about these crises and asking them to work with you to go through them. You have plunged a country in crisis into an election. And our crisis is that we have to social distance. We are working with a global pandemic, which is a medical health emergency. And part of dealing with that emergency is social distancing, is having to wear PPE, is further cutting you off from access to your people. And now we have a situation where, of course, the persons in isolation may be contagious, so they cannot exercise their right to vote. And we have a government who, in a situation where we do not need to have an election, we will go back to the public in the middle of a public health emergency, disenfranchise. It's 1,500 people now. We don't know how many people will end up being disenfranchised by the 19th of January. And we have put nothing in place to accommodate them. That is not a caring government. And of course, it will affect everybody
I think you,
negatively,
I think
because we
Ms.
have
Chris,
a
I think you're using
situation
the
in
wrong
some
word when you say
constitutions.
disenfranchised, though.
I didn't hear you,
I think you're
Ambassador.
using the
We have
wrong word when you say disenfranchise, because the government hasn't disenfranchised anyone. Look, the reality is all across the world now, the conventional wisdom is that COVID will be here with us for some time to come, and that the normal
which
functions of government.
Ambassador, with all due respect, it is
Just
very interesting that since we know
let me finish
COVID
the
will be
point.
here for the foreseeable future, why did we not frame an election and take the time to put things in place so that persons who are affected by COVID will be able to exercise their vote? Why did we plunge Barbados into a 2 years early election and pretend that it's because we care? Those of us watching, we
Um,
cannot help but
Miss,
feel
Miss
that it
Jewels,
must be a political reason,
all
a
I'm trying to
purely
say to
political
you,
and selfish reason. It is
all I'm
not
trying to say to
because
you
anybody
is
loves.
that, all I'm trying to say to you is that we have had 9 elections in CARICOM, for example. So there's no sense in our community that we are going to be postponing elections or not engaging in elections because of COVID.
Exactly.
I was an
But why don't we
an
put something
election.
in place
Just a
and it
minute,
will
please.
take the two
I was an
years? And why
election
don't we have
observer.
something?
Just a minute,
Okay, we
please.
can. Yes, we can only one
I
speak.
was an
One
observer.
person at a time.
Yeah, I was an election observer in the very first COVID-19 election that we had in CARICOM. That was the election in Suriname. And ever since then, we have been fine-tuning our techniques for how to hold elections safely in a COVID-19 environment. And if you look at what both the Electoral and Boundaries Commission has said, and what the COVID-19 monitoring unit has said, they have said that they have received protocols from the World Health Organization, from the Commonwealth, no doubt from CARFA and the CARICOM Community Secretariat as well. And they have outlined a number of measures that will be implemented in order to make the election as safe as possible. So,
But we are not talking about as safe as possible, um, Ambassador. We are
the reality is
discussing the
people in
people who will
isolation
not be
will not be
allowed to
able to
vote.
vote.
What
People
I
in
would say,
isolation.
what I would say to Ms.
Hold
Jills,
on. Let Dr. Tennyson get it. Let Dr. Joseph
what
get
I
in a
would say to
word.
Ms. Jills, two things though, that the 1,500 people in isolation are not DLP or APP only. So there'll be BLPs in isolation as well. And I would also just say to this Ms. Jills that it's just very odd. I'm always worried when I hear opposition is complain about an election, because I've always known that when you're in opposition, what you want is an election. When you're in government, that you don't want an election. So I would not go publicly and complain about an election and to say that it's too early because you are indicating lack of readiness. What I would do is
But
is
Tennyson,
to seize it,
the
see it
is
as
a
an
fact
opportunity.
that the election is too early. I'm not
No, no, no.
complaining.
It's not too early. The DLP people, for example, can sense now that they had no seats in parliament, and now they might win two or three.
But Tennyson, I am not arguing that I don't want an election because I don't want opportunity to win seats. I am saying it's a fact that the election season is 5 years and we are calling an election 3 years. But that's a fact. That ain't no opinion. The fact is that the election
No,
is
no,
early,
because
and
surely
it's
can call
just
it
a
anytime.
fact.
The one thing I would agree with you on is the question to you smiling.
I
The
like when
question
you agree
to
with me,
to
Tennyson.
Ambassador Comissiong. When Ambassador Comissiong says what the hard decisions, like you, I was asking myself, but let me hear. In other words, last election when the DLP were not calling the election, but we knew that they had some hard decisions to make because they had announced those. Primarily among those, the whole existence as a party was to condemn what they call social entitlement. They were doing that throughout. And we knew once they had been given a second term, they would begin to attack the free education, in particular, the free healthcare. I am hearing some unspecified noises about, and Ambassador might help us with that, about hard decisions and the very broad economic crisis, climate crisis, and COVID. So if we could have had an inkling, for example, I'm not left to speculate that one of the only thing I can speculate on, perhaps we may have mandatory vaccination coming in. Other than that, Ambassador, please elucidate for us on what are the likely, because I think Raquel is correct. If an election is meant to be a conversation about policy, and we should be hearing some idea of the policies upon which the government that have compelled the government to call the election early.
I agree with you, Dr. Joseph. On that note, let's wrap up that one. We come back to the second question comment that we have from our social media audience. Does a party's message to the electorate adapt to the area they're canvassing in? Raquel, I'm going to come to you because I know you are on the ground.
Well, yes, the message is going to be consistent throughout the constituencies, but there have to be also constituency concerns. Every constituency will have their own concerns,
And
and
different parts
naturally,
of the constituency have different concerns?
yes, because
Yes.
like sometimes we have general things, housing, labor, cost of living.
Roads.
But then like when you go St. George North, for instance, when they had the thing with the dump, well, nobody in St. Lucie really not gonna be interested in that specific thing. So we have to show them how our general philosophy would inform how we treat to the
But no,
done.
what I was actually talking about
So yeah,
is in a constituency, it's never all one social class. A constituency is made up
no,
of different social classes. So when you go into
no,
a constituency and you go, let's say you went Silver Hill, is your message to the people in Silver Hill different to the people in another part of the constituency that may be a little better off? I hope I phrased that properly.
I understand what you're asking, but as I said, we will speak to specific concerns across socio-economic areas where somebody would have an overwhelming concern that someone in a different area might not have. But what we will have is an overarching ideology, an overarching set of answers, solutions that we are going to address. And we are going to explain to you how we are going to address your specific concern in the context of our overarching our overarching plans and our philosophy.
Okay, thank
Because
you.
of course, as a
Go ahead.
progressive party, for example, we believe in leveraging technology. But
Okay. Go ahead. Go
people
ahead.
Jewel,
in people in Silver
Jewel, if I
Sands
may.
might have a different idea about how to leverage technology or different questions with regard to leveraging technology than somebody who's not in Silver Sands will have. But the idea that we are going to be telling everyone will be consistent across Barbados. But yes, we will tailor to your concerns, to your specific concerns. We will tell you how we will help you given what we believe.
Okay, thank you very much, Raquel. We're going to go to
Jewel,
commercial break. Ambassador, quickly, let me go to commercial break. When we come back, we will take your comments. And in the last segment of the X-Trail, we are looking at getting out the vote. And I want to go to Ambassador Comissiong briefly, and then Dr. Joseph, I'm going to come to you because I want to talk about your perspective on the St. Lucia election and how they got out the vote. Ambassador?
yes, I just want to make the point that in every election, particularly for the different candidates at the constituency level, local issues are important. However, in this particular election, this election is primarily about not local issue, but about the overall mission facing the country. I mean, let's be very clear. This is a very special period in history that we are in. The world really has never seen anything like this COVID-19. For maybe 100 years, that virtually shut down the world economy. And even before COVID-19, the present government inherited a financial situation where Barbados had four weeks of foreign exchange cover. Barbados was the third most indebted country in the world. Barbados basically could not even borrow on 23 successive downgrades of our economy, um, sewage running in the street. So, I mean, that is the kind of life and death challenge that the government has had to handle. We have had the IMF program. We made tremendous progress under it, and then we were hit by COVID. And then we had our first hurricane in 65 years telling us that climate change is here, global warming is here, and we are on the front line. So this election is more about those major life and death issues facing the country as a whole, and what is the plan, what is the mission for dealing with those crises and taking the country forward safely. And I think that is what it's going to come down to, is the Prime Minister is asking for a new mandate to deal with those major crises. And the electorate is going to be asked to look at the record of the government over the last 3.5 years and to determine whether this is the administration that they trust to deal with these very big life and death issues for the country.
All right, thanks a lot, Ambassador. We're going now to Dr. Joseph, and let's talk about the St. Lucia elections. I believe you were involved in that, and how they managed to get out the vote in a situation of a pandemic.
Well, I was involved, but from a distance. I wasn't really involved. I wouldn't like to say that I was involved because, quite honestly, I was not. But what I can tell you about San Lucia is that, to me, the only thing that was done differently was the big mass meetings were not done. So things like the candidate presentation, the presentation of candidates, the manifesto presentation, these were done online, and in my view, they were done very effectively. However, San Lucia had a huge COVID spike after the election, primarily because, as I said, while the mass meetings were not held, I mean the big mass rallies, there were a lot of the things like motorcades. There were huge, tremendously long motorcades and so forth, and so everything other than mass meetings, I can say safely that everything other than mass meetings were done in St. Lucia. So that's the only thing that was different. I don't think Barbados is approaching it in the same way. I think a little more creativity in relation to the kind of meeting we saw by the DLP a couple nights ago. It was a community meeting, but streamed live, but also with screens in various communities. I think Barbados would be well advised to avoid the large mass meetings. I don't know if motorcades and things are allowed, but anything that could not be easily policed by the COVID monitors was basically went overboard. But the good news about Barbados is that it's a short election, and that's another factor that will impact on turnout as well. It's a short and sharp election, and so the need to canvass or the constant weeks and weeks and months of mobilization will be absent. So you might see those as differences. I think the numbers will be there will be enough done to bring out who is able to come out, barring the broader structural factors that might impact on turnout. But I think anything other than the mass meetings, we will see them in Barbados.
Can any changes be implemented at this time here in Barbados to ensure that all Barbadians who want to vote get the opportunity to do so? And I know that a lot of in the last program, I talked about all the different options there were: absentee ballots, proxy voting, etc. But is the time frame too short to implement any of those? And that's my last question. And I'm going to do a round robin for everyone to get a chance to answer. So, Ambassador, I'm going to come to you.
Yes, I would imagine the time frame is probably too short. But these are things that we're going to have to look to in the future. And generally speaking, even outside of COVID, in many countries now, you have early voting, for example. You have mail-in ballots. So I think as we get more sophisticated in our electoral system, and we do need to get more sophisticated because we pride ourselves, Barbados, as having, in terms of the third world, a very advanced and outstanding electoral system. So we need to move in that direction for sure, but to expect to do it in a 2-week period, I don't think is realistic.
Okay. Raquel?
Well, we know it's impossible. Some of the things like the absentee ballot and the proxy, we simply don't have the legislation to support it, and it would require legislative change. And then the back end, of course, the EBC would have to be trained. Data managers will have to be put in place for any type of voting, even the mobile voting, which again leads me to wonder if it was not that the elections were called for a purely selfish and partisan reason, because Ambassador Comissiong pointed out that he's been an election observer since the first election. We had the guidelines coming from WHO and from the various agencies pointing out how you may do it safely, and they all mention things like the online voting, proxy voting, mail-in voting, mobile.
I think in Jamaica, they even set up a separate time for people who were affected with COVID to come to
Right, we have
vote. And we could still do that now, couldn't we?
We have mobile polling, and the only thing that we might be able to do, which is allowed under our constitution, of course, or not our constitution, under the act, is that we, just like how we have the police voting one day before the general polling day. We can have special days and have persons in isolation who, and especially persons in quarantine who are not showing any signs, they can be accommodated if we have a separate polling day for them, which where it can be safe, it can be social distance, they can be in a room where it is sanitized and treated and that sort of thing. And that is the only thing that I can think of that can be accommodated. But of course, the other things can be accommodated in a year or in less than a year, which again begs the question. Every year after Christmas or years, we have a COVID spike, and we are going to call elections right when the persons who would fall victim to that spike is going to start, when they're going to start showing symptoms and they're going to be isolated. We have all sorts of things that we can do, and we can make the legislative changes. We can train people. We have all the time in the world. The government has an overwhelming mandate that they can continue to treat to the issues that are being thrown up by the crises, because the people have faith in them. They have all the seats. So why now have we decided to go into election, disenfranchise a sizable community of persons, when there's so many other options that will not end up in over 1,000 people just not being able to vote?
Understood, Raquel. Thank you very much. And Dr.
Thank
Joseph,
you.
you get the last word.
Yeah, because I'm laughing because Ms. Gilkes ended her statement by producing a nice campaign slogan for the BLP. They have 30 seats of the people. But I would agree the time is too short. I certainly think, because don't forget, the electoral people are not aware of the date of the election until they hear it, like the rest of us, in a live broadcast. And so they did. I think make some quick decisions, and they had to take into consideration health concerns for all. And so I don't think they had enough time to do many of the things that Raquel would have been proposing that they do, to ensure as wide people possible.
Okay, I want to thank my guest, His Excellency Ambassador to CARICOM David Comissiong, representative for the Alliance Party for Progress, Raquel Gilkes, and Senior Lecturer in Political Science at UWI, Dr. Tennyson Joseph. Don't forget, you can send us your comments and your questions to our WhatsApp number at 228-5562 in time for the program we record at 1 o'clock every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Looking forward to chatting with you on Friday. Until then, continue to be on the X Trail. Bye-bye.